Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
This episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast with Dan Orlovsky is brought to you by Compassion International. It's $38 a month and a chance for you to release a child from poverty. Children in need waiting for you and I to respond. $38 a month. Food, education, medical care, vocational training, all done in the name of Jesus, tax deductible, and a chance for you to provide a child with hope. For more information about how you can release a child from poverty, go to compassion.com/sportsspectrum. Compassion.com/sportsspectrum. Pray about it and consider sponsoring a child today. Today on the podcast, we welcome back Dan Orlovsky to the program. Dan, the former NFL quarterback, 12 seasons in the NFL with the Lions, Texans, Colts, and Buccaneers, announcing his retirement in October 2017 right with us at Sports Spectrum. You can go to sportsspectrum.com and search Dan Orlovsky, and you'll see his first-person account of why he chose to retire when he did back in October of 2017. He was a standout quarterback in college at the University of Connecticut and a fifth-round draft pick back in 2005 by the Detroit Lions. Dan has been a good friend. I've known him now for about 5 years. We met at the NFL's broadcast boot camp back in 2014. And I remember seeing him then and thinking, someday this guy's going to be a really good broadcaster. And that someday is today, because he's with ESPN now, and he's doing a fantastic job. And he's one of the best broadcasters around, working on both the NFL as a studio analyst and college football as a game analyst. You can see him this year doing NFL analysis on shows like Get Up with Mike Greenberg and, of course, SportsCenter and NFL Live. And then he's also going to be part of a college football team with Bob Wischusen, calling games all year long, college football, on both ESPN and ABC. And we had a chance to get together at my church, Hillside Community Church, here in Bristol, Connecticut, and had a fantastic conversation. Dan's the best. You guys will love hearing what he has to say right now on Sports Spectrum's podcast. Take a listen. Dan, welcome to the show.
It's good to be back, man.
It's great to have you here and in person,
which
is always
worked
better.
It out.
Yeah, it worked out good. You were up here in Bristol doing some stuff for ESPN, and really that's where I want to start, because when we first had you on, it was 2 years ago. You had just retired. It was, I think, right before Thanksgiving, and you were mentioning how that was your first Thanksgiving that you got to spend with your family in 20 plus years because you didn't have football. So now it's been 2 years that you've been out of the game. You actually announced your retirement through Sports Spectrum. People should go check that out on our website. But things are going really well professionally because you're everywhere. When I turn on ESPN in the morning, there's Dan Orlovsky. And I turn on SportsCenter, and there's Dan Orlovsky. So things seem to be going really well.
Yeah, it's been a really fast and fun transition. You know, when we had talked and hey, I'm going to retire, there's always the question of like, and it's a big question. It's not what am I going to have for dinner? It's what am I going to do for the rest of my life?
Yeah.
And it's a scary one for a lot of people who do something for a long time. And I was fortunate enough that, you know, I'm kind of wired in a way where I don't really like to sit around and do nothing. Yeah. And I want to be always kind of engaged into something and whatnot. And what started as, you know, kind of a, hey, I want to see if this works thing on Twitter where I was breaking down football plays really started to gain some traction and get eyes on and start to be noticed in some ways. And I started to really, really enjoy it. And then found some passion within it, and then that opened up a lot of doors that I think that if this was 15 years ago, doors like that would not have been opened that quickly, and was fortunate enough to be part of ESPN or become a part of ESPN, and it, you know, being from the state of Connecticut, and so many people grew up on ESPN, but you know, as you know, like being from the state of Connecticut, when you get the opportunity to work at one of the biggest trademarks or benchmarks of Connecticut, it's been really cool. So, ESPN's been a great place to become a part of and to work for. It's funny because on the outside there might be, or at least in the past, there was this perception.
Sure.
And it's a very tight-knit, family-like atmosphere.
Absolutely.
And it's been a lot of fun.
I loved my time working there. I talk whenever I tell people about it, and then try to find the negative side of it. I can't give them any because it was just too much fun. Tight-knit family. I know the people that you worked with and the people that hired you, and a lot of people that I worked with are very similar.
Yeah.
We have common friends. But let me ask you about getting that job in broadcasting, because there's something I talk about when I speak or when I share, maybe at my church. We're taping this here at my church in Bristol, Connecticut, about being actively patient. Mm-hmm. And the Lord talks about patience a lot in the Bible, and whenever I ask people about what they're learning from the Lord, I would say 70% of them say they're learning patience because it's just a constant thing that we have to do.
Sure.
And I see the smile on your face, but actively patient to me means, yes, you're going to wait on the Lord to open up doors and see where he's going to take you, but you still got to be out there doing things. Mm-hmm. And you were a part of the broadcast boot camp. That's when you and I first met 4 years ago.
Yeah, 14. So 5 years ago.
5 years ago now, right? And so we met there. But so you were starting this thing about potentially seeing about broadcasting while you were still playing. But then when you retire, you kind of thinking broadcasting might work. So you do this Twitter thing just to kind of stay in the game, keep yourself relevant, whatever you want to say. Sure. And I remember seeing you at the Super Bowl in Minneapolis, kind of talking to people and just introducing yourself, getting yourself some reps and opportunities. So what does that mean when I tell you or say to you being actively patient, not just in your walk with the Lord, but really how this whole ESPN thing came about?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly patience is a big part of your walk, but so is the word go. And I was fortunate enough that I had a teacher, our team chaplain with the Lions, who I've mentioned before, Dave Wilson, and he was doing a teaching on Matthew 28, and he just started with the word go, and he was like, guys, this is not a past word, and this is not a future word. Yeah. It is a present word, and it is an action, and it literally, and so in that moment, I was like, that's a very interesting way of understanding the word go. It is this constant thing, and that's, yes, patience in work or patience in your marriage or patience in your walk is certainly more of not being overwhelmed with not knowing the future.
Yeah.
But it also, the Bible talks about you reap what you sow, and you've got to go do some things, and it has to be an active participation. And so it's not only something that I've experienced just in my walk, but I've experienced it in work, and I've experienced it in my relationships of making sure that I'm not just sitting there going, okay,
I'm sitting here, tell me,
when's it going to happen?
Yeah.
As long as my thought process is right and my heart is right on the where I'm going, that's when the patience is way easier, because if this is the vision that is inside of me, or this is the feel that I have inside of me, and I'm going that way. If it ends up that I should be going that way, I'll get there. And if it doesn't, that means there's a different way that God has planned or wants me to get maybe to a different destination.
Well, that's the sort of question that we all ask. How do I know that I'm in God's will, or what God's plan is for me? Mm-hmm. So how have you been able to decipher in all of this? Because obviously, once you got yourself on ESPN, and I'm bragging for you here, let somebody else praise you, not your own lips, right? It says in Proverbs, you were awesome, and you were doing great things, and people were noticing, and suddenly there's people coming after you. It was a little probably weird for you in that way, but how did you know where God's will was meant? How do you figure that out for your own personal journey, that this is God's will for my life? Yeah, I mean, part of me goes, it's really, really simple, and part of me goes, it's really, really hard, because I think the simple aspect of it is like, there's a beauty in lying your head down on the pillow at night and being able to just breathe and not feel that, and not remember that I did that and I know that was jacked up, or you know what, I'm doing this because I want this, or there's a beauty in that, and I think there's a lot of simplicity in that as well. And then it's really hard because people, we often want to do a lot, and we feel like we can do a lot, which is a great quality. How did I know that it was God's will or God's purpose? Because
when I would wake up, and certainly my wife and my kids, those were my first initial thoughts. But then it was going to, okay, how can I do this today? Or how can I do this in work today? How can I break this tape down today? Or, man, I would love to show somebody that's something cool that, like, it became a burning fire, a passion inside that I wanted to be good at. And it wasn't about, I want to be on ESPN 3 days a week. And it wasn't about, all right, I want ESPN to pay me X amount of dollars. And it wasn't about, I want to be the person that it was about, like, I just have a lot of fun doing this. I'm passionate about it. And I'm good at it. Yeah. And I don't think there's certainly a healthy, prideful thing in it, but it's not a look at me prideful thing. It's like, wait, I'm good at this. Don't run from something you're good at.
But it was the same kind of thing in your playing days, right? Like There's a healthy confidence, and then there's a cockiness and an arrogance that can really get you in trouble.
Exactly. And that, the correlation between playing and, I mean, I can only speak to what I do now, but it is wild. I mean, the correlation between, like, okay, how do you make sure that you're part of the team? How do you do things that you can make sure that you're kind of owning your role? What's the work that it's taking to make sure that you are doing your job as good as you can? What kind of impact can you have on people around you? You're part of a team. There's a lot of correlations.
Dan Orlovsky is our guest here at Sports Spectrum. So I get a lot of questions. It's funny. In my career at ESPN, I only worked with Mike and Mike for 2 years. People think I was there the whole time because it was my last job. And people ask me about Greeny all the time. And you're on Get Up with Greeny. And I don't think he'll ever listen to this podcast. I could be wrong. Maybe he will. But I loved working with him. I just thought he was such a fun dude who was so good. So good at what he does. You work on Get Up, and you're on that show a lot with Greeny now. Just what are your impressions of having now worked with him and gotten to know him for these last few months?
Unbelievable. I would say this. The thing that has kind of taken me aback working with him was how much of a nice person he is. Like, just a genuinely nice person. And he is at a point, and I didn't know Greeny till about a year ago, but it seems like he is at a point where he truly wants to be around good, nice, kind people, and he wants to be that to someone else. How smart he is, I marvel at how he can do a lot of different things. How much he still wants to be challenged is impressive to me. Like, he still wants to be challenged, and it's almost like the saying, "How you do anything is how you do everything." Like, the little things matter to him. But just, I mean, here's a story. So, I'm a golfer. He's a golfer. And he was like, you want to go play at this place called Bayonne, which is a really beautiful golf club right across Manhattan. And it is old. It's an old, like, kind of landfill in a way that wealthy human built. And it's an exclusive place. Let's say that. And so I'm like, yeah, all right. And so I drive up one Saturday morning and we play. And he's like, you know what? You didn't get the full experience, Danny. First of all, he calls me Danny, which, like, 2 people in the world called me Danny. So he's like, you didn't get the full experience. So a couple weeks ago, he's like, let's do the show. We'll walk down Manhattan. We'll hop on the boat. We'll go through Ellis Island and past the Statue of Liberty, and we'll just have our round of golf. And, like, just the joy of him. We hop on the boat, and it's not a brag thing. It's an experience thing. Like, he wants to take you back in time in a way. And so we're going through the New York Harbor, and he's talking to me about, the battle against Britain. And then we're going through Ellis Island and how so many people have come through and just the historical aspect of it. And he just genuinely wants to see you smile in this experience. And so he's been incredible to me. And I just honestly think he enjoys being around young people that are energetic and want to have fun.
He always included everyone on the show. Now, I worked when it was Mike and Mike, so I haven't been around Get Up. But he always included everybody to the point where he would use their names on the show, which he does with Get Up, I know. And you always felt like you were a part of a family. And our family at Mike and Mike was maybe 20 of us, 25 of us, TV, radio, digital. I don't know what that number is on Get Up. It might be similar.
Yeah.
But do you sense that? Like, he genuinely loves to be around people and want to include them in his journey.
Yeah, it's funny. So I was texting with two of the guys who are relatively main producers, Zach Benabid and Nick Tutz, on the show now. And I was texting with them about 10 days ago. And we were having this kind of very similar conversation about Greeny. And because, we know that Get Up went through, during its starting point, it just went through changes.
Sure.
And they both were like, listen, when things were getting changed and it wasn't great and there was question marks, Greeny made it a point to make sure that we were included in everything. Like, he made it a point to make sure that he went up to and said, hey, we're going to be okay. You guys are important. Like, and they were like that. Those small things matter. Like, we were down in at the draft in Nashville. And we all had a great show and whatnot. And saying goodbye, like, again, Jason, he gave me a hug and was like, love you, man. And I was like, what? Like, you're my Greenberg. So it's just, he really truly values people. He really does.
With this, I don't want to call it fame, but it is fame in the sense of it from a TV perspective. The fame, you were already an NFL player, so there's that level of quote unquote fame. But the platform starts to increase for you as you start to develop as a broadcaster, and with that comes the blessing and the curse of social media. And it's funny, right before you got here, I was just flipping through Twitter and I saw you had responded to, if you want to call him a troll, whatever it is, somebody who just wasn't very fond of seeing you on television, apparently. And immediately, I guess, when he saw you, he equated you to Detroit Lions quarterback who was a backup for the majority of it. Like, he equated you to whatever he wanted to remember you as from a player, and just didn't have nice things to say. It wasn't the worst thing I've heard on Twitter, certainly.
Sure.
But it wasn't nice. And your response was very kill him with kindness type of response. Hey, thanks for the feedback. Hopefully I can earn your time, earn your viewing
viewership
time. Your viewership. I thought it was an interesting response, and it's actually one of the questions I wanted to talk about was dealing with trolls, dealing with that social media world, because I remember you and I conversating, if that's even a word, about this 2 years ago at the boot camp about using social media to your advantage, and you had started to do that when you retired. And now when you do that and you're active on there, not everybody's going to praise you and not everybody's going to pat you on your back. So tell me about walking through dealing with trolls.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's the reality that it's a challenge. You need to be honest about social media. It's not real. There's a great part of it that is not real. But I also, I was fortunate enough because, again, doors were open because of social media. Yeah. So I'm not going to be the one to essentially knock social media. I always viewed Twitter as a weapon for me when it came to getting, okay, I'm good at this out there. I try to take the same mindset when someone tries to belittle or dog me or whatever they do, troll me, that it's a weapon. Yeah. And I can use it as a really nasty weapon, which Twitter is. Twitter's a dark place for a lot of times.
Absolutely.
Or I can use it as a weapon of maybe trying to encourage someone or trying to get somebody to, get some pressure off their back or whatnot. And so I'm not perfect with it. I was fortunate early on at ESPN. Lee Fitting, who's obviously a pivotal part of the company, sent out a text message to me. He's like, do me one favor. I was like, what's up? And he was like, social media is poison. Understand that. And it was just a good understanding of I'm not going to engage in the nastiness because that's easy, right? Like, engaging is the nastiness. And if I'm going to put up in my Twitter bio, the first thing is follower of Jesus. Yeah. Then that should be apparent. And again, it's not going to be perfect, but that should be apparent. And that might be the only interaction I ever get with that person. And I just think in a couple years, my boys are 7, in 10 years or so, they're probably going to have Twitter in some capacity. Yeah. And I want them to have, if it presents itself, I want them to know that their dad chose to be different. And that's just another example of me trying to be different in that world is, if they can go to my Twitter page and if they see me using cuss words or dogging someone else or making fun of somebody or belittling, What are they going to do? You know? And so, but if they see their dad getting cut down by somebody and going, I'm sorry you feel that way or whatnot, maybe that singular moment, I don't know, but that singular moment may have an impact on one of my kids or someone else's kids or the person who said it to me. Maybe she's in a bad place or she's in a bad place and they're mad at something, and maybe somebody not being a jerk to them will make them feel important or whatnot. Again, I'm not perfect with it, but it's important because it's easy to be nasty on Twitter and it's hard to be nice.
Well, empathy is a lost art in today's culture on all levels, it appears like, especially social media. It's not the most empathetic place, but you just described empathy in the way that you said that. Maybe that person's going through a tough time and they just saw me and that triggered me, them to tweet at me, but there's really something deeper going on. How has that helped you in your walk? Because I asked this to a few people recently on the podcast about the responsibility as people who are believers of God and followers of Christ. We're called to go. You use that word. We're called to be open about our faith. We're called to tell others about what we believe. We're also called to love others as ourselves.
Yeah.
So tell me how this whole journey the last few years has worked in terms of your faith and growing in your faith. And maybe the social media component comes into that.
It absolutely does. I would say social media is a massive component of it because, again, if I sat here and the microphones weren't on and whatnot, and we had a conversation for the first time ever, and I told you, I'm a believer in Jesus, and then I'm talking about cheating on my wife or using crazy language or just talking about how selfish I am or whatnot, you're going to be like, what? Or if I'm just making fun of you or what, you're going to be like, wait, this doesn't align. So on social media, again, if I'm going to put Father or Jesus out there, my words and my actions should follow being under that umbrella. It's crazy because naturally I am not a compassionate and empathetic person. I'm just not.
Yeah.
My wife is. I know I have friends who are. I have friends who are guys that are. I'm not. And so social media in many ways has gotten me to be better at that, to be more conscious of it. It's crazy because what I've realized over the last year, and it's such a small thing, is if I start my day, and I know you've heard this a gajillion times, but if I start my day where I spend 3 minutes in the Word, 5 minutes in the Word, 10 minutes in the Word, actually in the Word, not like scrolling through and liking someone's Bible verse or listening to a song in my car, but actually spending time in the Word and reading something and then going, okay, what is this saying to me? I am a more compassionate and empathetic person throughout the day with my wife, with my kids, with myself, with the general public. Then if I don't, if it's I got to get up tomorrow morning at 4 and I'm sprinting out the door and whatnot, I'm less empathetic. And so, that's such a small thing that has great, profound impact on the everyday of it for me. But that's kind of something that has been really pressed upon me over the last year.
Are you able to do that, especially on a morning where you have to get up at 4 a.m. for Get Up or a show like that and get to the office I'm assuming by 5 or so? Are you able to keep that discipline going?
No. Am I able to? Yes. Do I? No. And there's a part of there's a part of that is in some ways laziness. There's a part of I listened to I'm going to forget his name. Akbar
Baja Biamila,
who said busyness isn't a badge of honor, right?
Yeah, yes.
And it's kind of when I listened to it, I was like, oh my goodness, that is
from somebody who's as busy as they can be.
Yeah, and there's mornings when I'm crazy busy, and oftentimes I want to wear it as a badge of honor. Yeah. And that kind of convicted me in a lot of different ways. So am I able to? Yeah. Do I do it all the time? No. I also don't hold myself hostage to it as well. It's something that I'm just conscious of because it's important. Yeah. But if I don't, it's not like I beat myself up over it, but I want to be better at it.
Have you figured out, the season is upon us, the NFL season starting very, very soon. Have you tried to start figuring out ways to keep that connection not only with the Lord but with your kids. You have triplet boys and a little girl, so four kids running around, and your wife is obviously, as many former players or current players' wives are. She's the queen, right?
Yeah,
keeping things together. But getting ready during season, I remember when I had to work on the NFL, and I had just been named an elder here at the church we're taping this at, and I had to go to my pastor and say, I'm so honored that you made me an elder. Now, I don't think I'm going to be able to come to church on Sunday mornings for 4 months.
Right.
Because I had to work on the NFL.
Sure.
That was very hard for me.
Sure.
Tell me about what that's like for you. Have you started to think about mapping out what that's going to look like during the season? Because you're going to be doing college too.
Yeah. I mean, there's got to be a confidence in saying no, and I've experienced that where, an opportunity is presented and say, hey, can you do this? And you're like, well, yeah. And then you go, okay, well, what's the trade-off? If I say yes to this, what do I have to say no to? Yep. And so, I've started to map that out. I've had to say no to some stuff, and having confidence in saying no is a good thing that I've started to learn. Yeah. I've got, it's important to me. One, why we decided to move is because I wanted to make sure that I was home to being a dad and a husband more. So, stability. It's not the balance; it's more finding the rhythm that I'm looking forward to. A big thing for me is getting up and getting things accomplished before my kids wake up. And when my kids come home from school, I'm done. Now, I might do something at 8:30 at night for 30 or 40 minutes, but when my kids come home from school, I'm done, because the reality is my kids are 7, soon to be 8 in the second grade. Yeah. And I only have so many more days when they walk into our house and are done with school. And so if I have to carve out that hour I don't want to be done 10 minutes after they get home from school.
Yeah.
When they get home from school, I'm done with work. And I'm fortunate that I can do a lot of stuff from home and be a part of that. But that is something that has been that is probably the one thing that I'm focused on this season, is when my kids wake up and I'm home, I'm not doing anything. And when my kids are done from school and walk in the door, I'm not doing anything. And then what's crazy is, because I've spent so much of my time over the past couple of years in a car driving to work in the morning, and I turn on the Message on Sirius Radio.
Oh, yeah.
I actually want to spend the first 20 minutes in the car in dead silence. Because noise is constant in our life, whether it's literal noise or noise on social media or noise from, and so I just want to spend 20 minutes in silence of what comes into my mind. And
so, are you praying to God? Are you listening?
I'm kind of in place. I'm in a place with God. I don't know if I'm going to be constantly audible and using words, but I just want to sit there and breathe and be in silent in a place with God, so I can just be present with Him and Him present with me.
One of the things I've been thinking about lately is memorization and just knowing Scripture.
Yeah.
And I want to do something fun with you for a second before we get into the Scripture side of it. I heard you on a podcast maybe last year, and they just asked you about the craziness of play calling as a quarterback and memorizing plays. And you have a playbook that is, I don't know how many pages. What's a playbook?
I mean,
typically in the NFL.
300 pages, 300 I would pages. Say.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you have to, in essence, memorize that.
Yeah.
Right? As a quarterback. So the fun side of this first is, what's a fun play that you remember from your career that just would sound so wacky? Can I put you on the spot?
Yeah.
Is there something that comes to
mind?
I
mean, there's 1,000 of them, but let's do something like, boogie to double right open slot, past 394 solid X and Z fade arrow, kill it with 15-week draw now.
And you're looking at this table, so there's nothing in front of you, and that just comes to mind. What year is that from?
That is from 2014, Detroit Lions. Okay. It was part of what is the New Orleans Saints playbook.
New Orleans Saints playbook.
Yeah.
So what was it that you just said? Like, what is that play?
So it's 2 plays in one, where Boogie is like you break the huddle and you line up in a certain formation. Boogie tells you we're going to line up in just double, which is like a tight end receiver and then 2 receivers.
Okay.
Boogie to double right open slot would tell you that we're going to stay in 2x2, but the open is going to get the tight end to go outside, stay in slot. And then 394 is a pass protection telling 3-step drop. It's going to happen quick. And then like X and Z, fade, arrow are the pass concepts. And then kill means like we're going to kill the player, go to the next play. You see guys kill, or Oma. And then we'll go to a run if the defense if we don't like what the defense is kind of showing to us, or we do like what the defense is showing to us.
So as you describe that play, from an O-lineman's perspective, they're just listening for
punks.
What part?
They would be listening towards 394, kill, 15.
Okay, and then wide receivers are
hearing everything because they got to hear formation. They don't have to hear 394.
Okay. Running back, same thing.
Running backs need to hear everything, for sure, because they need to know the formation because sometimes they're moved around. They need to know the protection because they're obviously a part of it. They need to know the pass route because their pass route, their route might change dictated on what's happening on the outside, and obviously they need to know if we're changing the play to a run. So tight ends probably have as hard a job as anybody. Offensive linemen, I used to always move from. I'd be like, dude, you guys have to hear like 3 things. Chill out. So,
and do their job properly, right? So let's compound that because that was fun to spiritual life.
Yeah.
I was one of those Rain Man kids. I still have every Super Bowl memorized. You asked me a Super Bowl, Trey Wingo and I used to have this fun little battle because he is the same guy. We would be, okay, who won the Super Bowl? Where was it played? Who was the MVP? What was the score?
Yeah.
I was just Rain Man.
Okay.
And I had those. And I would do this in front of my brothers and my family. And especially since I became a Christian, my pastor once said, okay, who won Super Bowl 10? And I'd say, well, that was Pittsburgh. They beat Dallas 21-17. And Lynn Swann was the MVP. And he goes, why can't you do that with Scripture? And we were laughing and joking and kind of thinking, but it challenged me a little bit.
Sure.
And so what does Scripture memorization mean to you? Or is that something that you have struggled with or not made a priority? Or is it how important is that for you to kind of look at your Bible in the same way? Obviously, it's different than you would your NFL playbook.
Yeah, I mean, I've gone through seasons of that. I've gone through ups and downs. You know, when I was very early on in my walk and part of Bible studies with the Lions, we started to challenge each other. And Friday Bible studies, like we would have chunks of not just a verse, but chunks of 3, 4, 5, 6 verses strung together, memorized. And we would go one by one in the study, and you had to get it right. I mean, this was kind of a Dave Wilson, John Kitna thing.
Yes.
And you took a lot of pride in memorizing those scriptures. In that moment, it was something that was a really big part and important part of my walk. The dangerous part for me was when it became about, I just memorized 8 verses, guys, you know, because you're competitive and it's like, you're sitting there like, I hope you mess up. I hope you mess up. And so, you know, that kind of went away for a little bit for me just because it did. Then down in Tampa, we started doing it. Gerald McCoy and I started to do it, and we started to challenge some guys that were on our team to start and be a part of some Bible memorization. So, you know, I think that for me, but for a lot of people, it's just another tool in the bag to help your walk. Like when you're in a moment of turmoil or in a moment of frustration, like, is there a verse that you can turn to on a consistent basis that you've memorized that is for you? I think the Bible memorization is for you. It's not to go, hey,
brag about it. Yeah.
Do you know what this says? And if that person doesn't, you can dog on them. So I think it's an internal thing. I wish I was better at it for sure. I used to always say guys in the NFL like that would struggle with learning playbooks. I'd be like, dude, listen, you're so talented. I'm telling you, you're going to make $30 million if you'll just read this book. Like, just study this book. And guys wouldn't. They wouldn't study their playbooks and they would wash out. But the Bible's in a similar way. Like, okay, if you told me to memorize Hebrews for $30 million, I bet you a lot of people would.
Yeah, I bet you would too.
It's certainly an aspect.
As we wind down here, thanks so much again for the time. It's funny, I'll tell people listening, you know, you mentioned saying no. This is the second time that I reached out because the first time you couldn't say yes to us getting together, even though we were 5 minutes from each other because of work and priorities with your family. So I just want people to know that this isn't just Dan saying this. I've experienced this in action. I do it. You know how I responded to you. I appreciate you being willing to say no. It's a hard thing for people to develop, especially people who are quote unquote nice people, or especially Christians. I think it's the hardest thing for people to be able to say no. But let's wind down here. I think I want to go to story time in the NFL, which if there is a few minutes left, I think people like to hear stories. Let's not even talk about the Faith side of it for a minute, and maybe Faith will come into it because you play with some really interesting characters. Mm-hmm. You mentioned John Kitna, who is now the Cowboys quarterback coach and just one of those spiritual warriors. Mm-hmm. Love John Kitna. You play with a lot of great players. You play with Matthew Stafford for many years. Give me a couple, maybe a story that sticks out of the craziest thing you've seen in your NFL career, or just one crazy thing that you've seen. You've probably seen a lot of crazy things.
Oh my goodness.
Does one come to mind? Just it could be randomly anything. I'm leaving it wide open here.
Yeah, I've got 1,000 of them. One of the craziest experiences I had. So my rookie year, we had Steve Mariucci as our head coach with the Lions, and we were a really young team, and Mooch was really a energetic, fun-loving, kind of not a grinding type of coach. Things go south, and we don't play well, and he unfortunately gets fired right around Thanksgiving of my rookie year. So we bring in this coach named Rod Marinelli, who's a phenomenal human being, and
Dallas now still,
and so many things. You go the opposite. Mooch was a player's coach and friendly and kind of, I don't want to say easy, but accommodating. Yeah. And then Rod, who was trying to change this culture, came with the iron fist. And so we get our preseason schedule. This is after a brutal training camp. We get our preseason schedule, and we have to play at Oakland. And you play at Oakland at 7 or 8 o'clock at night local time. Mm-hmm. So you're 11 o'clock East Coast time, which is Detroit is in the East Coast. So normally when you go to a road game, you fly out the night before, the day before, sometimes it's 2 days. You stay in the hotel, you get someone acclimated to the space and the time zone, you play the next day, you fly home after the game. Well, Rod, again, focused on changing the culture and mental toughness, and I'm going to grind these guys. We get to game week, and they're like, you guys, we're not flying out the day before the game. And we're all like, what? So we wake up that morning, which is a Saturday game. We wake up that morning in Detroit on Saturday morning, still in Detroit. We practice that morning. We hop on a flight to fly out to Oakland, and we get to Oakland, I want to say at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, maybe something like that. We all go into a ballroom that's just similar to this space that we're in right now at your church as NFL players. We all go into the ballroom for 2 hours, sit around, then we go to the game and play. We get absolutely whooped in this preseason game. And Rod was like, I don't care what time it is, where we play, where we got to play them, whatever, we're going to be a tough football team. And at the moment, I was like, this sounds pretty good, Man, we got whooped. Everyone stunk on tape. And I just sat back going, what did our coach expect to happen? And we just practiced and flew and played a game. That was a really crazy moment for me to be like, what is going on right now? Relatively young in my NFL career.
That's just nuts, and that's a welcome to the NFL moment.
It did not work.
I'm guessing it never happened
Appreciate
again.
the effort. It did not happen again.
Yeah,
no, I appreciated the effort, but it did not work.
What's the most impressive thing you've ever seen done on a football field from somebody you got to watch, whether you were on the sidelines, watching your fellow quarterback, maybe watching an opposing team, a player? What's the most impressive thing you've seen?
I mean, I've been around some guys now. Roy Williams from University of Texas once ran a comeback route in practice. So a comeback is you run vertical off the line for like 18 or 20 yards, just like you're going to go deep, and you stop and you come back at a 45-degree angle towards the sidelines, almost like the top of a number 1, if you're envisioning that. Yeah. And Roy gets to the top, and the ball comes out of, this was at the time, John Kitna's hands. This is at the time of John Kitna's hands. So the ball comes out, and you see Roy turn towards the sidelines, and he starts to fall. And so almost like he's doing like a bear crawl, Roy has got his hands and his feet on the ground, and he's looking down at the ground, and the ball's on its way. And all of a sudden, Roy just throws his hands up while he's still looking down, throws his hands up over his head and moving towards the sideline, like all in one action, and just plucks the ball out of the air without ever looking at the ball. And I just remember standing there and being like, wait, what? Like, that was the Powerade commercial when Vic throws the ball at the stadium. Like, that was one of the freakiest things, one of the wildest things I'd ever seen anybody do. And I'm not exaggerating this. Like, this was by the time he gets out of that cut and breaking towards the sideline, he's at 80% speed. Like, he's moving still. Yeah. He's stumbling, bear crawling on the ground, just plucks a ball out of the air at 6'4". And I was like, well, how did that happen? Without ever looking at the ball. So, but I've been a part of Calvin Johnson doing some fascinating things. Matthew Stafford threw the ball 82 yards in practice one day.
82 yards.
82 yards in practice one day. 40. No, I think like 64 yards, 65 yards, something like that. But this was 82 yards in like a play. This wasn't just launching it. Yeah. So I've seen some wild athletic feats.
I love it. I love it. Those story times always fun. And now you're also going to be doing, because for the 2019 football season, because I think you're a football analyst. I'd like to say NFL, but right now maybe people watching you on ESPN as the preseason's going on might see you breaking down some NFL games. But you're going to be calling college football games this year on ESPN and ABC with Bob Wischusen and Allison Williams, college football. So what is that workload like? Because you kind of got to keep your eyes on both.
Yeah, I mean, when I went to ESPN last year and they asked me would I be willing to try, because for a long time ESPN's been like, oh, this is a football, they're an NFL guy, they're a college guy, and they were like, would you be willing to try it? Yeah. Yes, because then I have the opportunity to be different. And they were like, you sure you can handle it? And a lot of people called me and told me not to. They were like, don't do it, it's too much. There's an intellectual aspect that comes into play. Like, you got to be able to handle information. Thankfully, my playing days kind of prepared me for that. I think it's easier nowadays to stay up to date with things because of a thing like Twitter. Yeah. Football is football, but it's different in college than it is in the NFL. It just, the style is different. It's going back to saying no. You know, it is a workload. Absolutely. You have to be efficient and diligent with your time. Yes. And then you've got to be willing to say no. There's sometimes I had a producer go, hey, we're going to talk about this. And I would be like, guys, I'm not ready to talk about that. I'm not going to talk about that. And some producers are like, all right, great. Thank you for saying that. Some producers get a little upset about it. But at the end of the day, I don't want to put myself in a bad place. I don't want to put the people I'm on television with a bad place. I don't want to put ESPN in a bad place. I've got a responsibility to tell you, yes, I do know what I'm talking about, or I don't. So, yes, it's a workload. You got to be efficient in handling your time. But I tell my friends this all the time, because a lot of times they'll go like, oh, you grind pretty good. And I go, so do you. You know, like that. We all grind a little bit. And college football, it's a 3-month sprint, man. It's September, October, November is a big part of it. But I'm fortunate and certainly very blessed to be a part of it.
What's your first game? Do you know week 1 what you got?
Yeah, we have South Carolina at North Carolina, which is really cool because obviously Mac Brown coming back, and Will Muschamp, who's the head coach at South Carolina, was Mac Brown's defensive coordinator at Texas. Okay. So a lot of cool aspects of it, and something really exciting. Week 2, we have Ohio State at home against Cincinnati, which I love. Ryan Day, I don't know him, but I'm really intrigued with them. And Luke Fickell's done a great job at Cincinnati. So, some really cool games early on.
Do you have a preference in terms of, if I was to say Dan Orlovsky, the fan, college or NFL, could you pick a preference like what you – I mean, it's probably unfair because you're getting paid to do both. Yeah. But just fan perspective, for me, I've always preferred the NFL. I don't not like college. I love college football, but I always prefer the NFL. Did you have –
I was an NFL guy.
NFL guy.
For sure, until I did college football last year. And I got on campus, and you saw the pageantry and the passion and the joy. If I had to pick one, and I've had this conversation with people that are assigned to give me jobs or not, there's nothing like live events. Yeah. There's nothing like being at a live football game. And I had live college games last year, and I told them if I had to choose, I don't not want to do that. So it's just college football is a very special place.
I love it. Dan Orlovsky, last question here. The question I normally ask, you listen to the podcast, so you know this, is I'm asking people what they're learning from the Lord right now. But I'm going to twist this a little bit, and maybe the answer still refers to the question that I normally would ask. But here's the question. What spiritual surgery has God been working on you lately? So it's kind of the same question, but it's worded a little different.
Love. The simplicity of love. And... You know, like, am I truly loving my wife enough? Am I truly loving my kids enough? The impossible way that God loves us, like truly not loves us and loves on us. Am I doing that? Because, my family's going through a little bit of change right now. And so you're focused on so many different things, moving and job and all that stuff. But I want my kids to make sure that they understand what hard work is, and they understand that they've got to listen and respect others, and that stuff matters for sure. But God has really been convicting me and reminding me through all of this, the most important thing is that they're feeling loved, that they know that they're loved. So am I doing that with my wife, or am I just, telling my wife it'll be all okay? Or am I just telling my wife, like, no, it'll work out, or we'll get the house you want, and just thinking that is love? Or am I just focused on making sure our kids are signed up for school and that they're listening to me, that, that they realize that is important, but are they genuinely, when they go to bed, do they feel loved by their dad? And that's been a big conviction of mine from God, that the simplistic beauty in that. And, I'm a really big picture thinker. And so, I always try to think, okay, 30 years from now, do I want to are my kids going to look back and be like, give us one thing that your dad did for you? And I don't want the number one answer to be, he taught me how to work hard. I don't want the number one. I want that to be a answer, or he taught me how important respect was. That's an A answer. But I want their number one answer and my wife's number one answer to be like, my dad loved us. And that is something that God has really been, to use your word, surgically having surgery upon me.
Yeah. Dan Orlovsky, ESPN football analyst, college football and the NFL this year. You can see him on Get Up with Mike Greenberg and all across the ESPN landscape of different shows, and also watching him this year calling college football games on Saturdays with Bob Wischusen and Allison Williamson. Thanks for doing this. Really appreciate you.
Thank you, man. Thank you. I'm glad we finally got time. Thank you.
Me too. We'll do it again, too. Many thanks to Dan Orlovsky for joining us here on Sports Spectrum. One of the best dudes you'll ever meet. And you'll be watching him a lot this year on ESPN, both doing college football and NFL coverage in the studio. Watch Get Up with Mike Greenberg each morning on ESPN. Dan is sure to be on there a few times a week breaking down the NFL. And, of course, on Saturdays, he'll be working on ESPN and ABC calling college football games. Dan's a great dude. Just really thankful to him for taking the time to do this interview and to come back on the show. And not only that, but to do it in person. He's a very busy guy. Just really appreciate Dan sharing all that he's got going on, both spiritually and with his new gig as an ESPN analyst. Appreciate Dan Orlovsky for being here on Sports Spectrum. We thank Dan, we thank you for listening, and we thank Compassion International. We've told you about Compassion. We love them. We're so thankful to have them as sponsors. $38 a month, tax deductible. That's it. And you get connected directly to a child waiting to be released from poverty. For more information about how you can sponsor a child with Compassion, go to compassion.com/sportsspectrum. Compassion.com/sportsspectrum. Pray about it and consider it. Consider releasing a child from poverty today. With football season upon us, please give us a follow on our social media pages, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can also like our YouTube channel. Man, it's a great time for sports. You have baseball playoffs heating up, football, college, and NFL. The NBA is just around the corner. The fall is the best time of year for sports. And you don't want to miss sports intersecting with faith. So check us out at sportsspectrum.com and be sure to stay in tune with everything that we're bringing you here at Sports Spectrum. Click that subscribe button as well on whatever app you're listening to so you never miss an episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast. Thanks so much for listening to this interview with Dan Orlovsky. We love you guys. Have a great rest of your day. This is Sports Spectrum.